Hello everyone, Damon Kasky here. Sorry about that. I had started a live broadcast just a moment ago and I accidentally hit the stop streaming button. So that's a little embarrassing. Now I have to kind of start all over again. Anyway, what I want to do is walk you through the process of adding precision jumping, or Mario style jump control, if you will, into OpenBOR modules. This is a feature that I intend to add to the native feature set of upcoming OpenBOR versions, but for right now you do need to use a script, but it's a very simple script. It's something I crafted years ago and have gradually updated into my current projects, but over time I've started using newer script commands that aren't available in the current stable release. So I'm going to have to backport it a little bit, and to do that we're going to go through a live coding process. So I have here the Rhythm of Destruction 2 Street Fighter Edition, crafted by Mr. Q and King Herb. It's a fun little module for its time, one of the very first that I came across when I first started playing OpenBOR. So first thing we want to do is extract its pack so that we can modify it. Copy it, bring it out here because that's where I want the data folder to go, and then we will drag it onto the BOR pack program, and there we are. It is extracted. So we don't need that copy anymore. And now I've already pulled in a current copy of the OpenBOR engine, the current release of the OpenBOR engine. So just to make sure that it will run this module, because it is a very old module. Well, as you can see, it runs just fine. But of course, there is no jump control other than jump horizontally. You can't jump vertically, and that's pretty much it. So let's see what we can do about that. Let's open up the data folder and characters. Where are you? Ah, there we are, Dulcie. And then open up the text folder. I'm going to open it up with Visual Studio. And jump height. Let's make it a jump height of 6, and hopefully I'm remembering the correct commands. There we go. Let's keep jumping, obviously much higher. But we can't control that. Just one tap of the jump button and sends him into the sky. So what we're going to do is go back to the data folder, back to Dulcie. And let's create a script folder. And in that script folder, I'm going to create a new file. Just a text document will be just fine, although we're going to change the extension to make it a C document. Event on move A. That's a little bit of legacy left over. It should have been on move Y for Y-axis instead of A for altitude, but that's just the way we are. So now we have an event on move A. So let's go ahead and fire that up. And of course we'll want a void main function to run the function that I'm about to write. And now let's see, void, let's call this DC jump height. Actually, I'll call it DC Mario. height control. And it is going to need the entity that we're targeting. So that is a void and acting entity. If you guys are looking at a lot of my old scripts, you'll probably see a lot of stuff like vint. That's Hungarian notation. It's not something that I use anymore. The idea behind it was by saying vint, you were saying void entity, or if I would say I number, it was supposed to mean integer, but it really, I have found, is just not a great naming convention, so I've moved away from that. I prefer more descriptive variable names these days. Anyway, let's actually write some code. Let me glance over at my notes here because I want to make sure that I get it right and not have to do it 15 times. So yeah, we do have an int, and the next thing that we will want to know is if we're actually jumping. So let's see, integer jumping flag, and let's initialize that to 0. Let's see, we will need a velocity, so float velocity, actually y, not x. Let's initialize that to to a 0 decimal. And I'm not quite sure what else I'll need. I just have to start writing some code before. Oh, we'll need the key. So integer key hold, and that will also start out as a 0. This is something else that I prefer to do these days. I always prefer to initialize my variables to some default and then actually populate my variables below. There's a couple different reasons for that. One, to me, it just gets everything set up as sort of a library without performing active code on it. And then if I wanted to, say, debug my function, I could do something like log the title, and I'm creating a log before I'm actually doing any actions, and so that I know that at least my log that tells me what function I'm working on is going to run before the error, wherever that error happens to be, kicks in and the engine shuts down. Now, let's get actually we're getting the entity elsewhere, so I don't need to worry about that. But I do need to know if I am in the air. So, actually, I'm sorry, I do need to know if I'm jumping. So to do that, let's see, that's going to be jumping flag. It's been a while since I've used these legacy commands. Again, I use the more modern script commands that I've added in prototype versions of the engine. They're a lot easier to work with and understand than these sort of mashed together get entity property functions. Let's see, get entity property. Let's put in the acting entity and AI flag, I think it was, and jumping. And the next thing, let's see, we were going to do an if on that, if jumping flag, and this is going to be an escape clause. So in other words, what I'm doing is I'm checking if the jumping flag is active, and if it is not, then I am escaping this function immediately by running a return. Actually, I don't need to return a value, just a return. And then the engine doesn't bother to run any code that's downstream. So it's kind of an optimization. Now the next thing I want to do is get the state of the keys. So for that, let's see, I'm going to need a player property. Let's see. That is get, so let's go up here and get player index, int player index is going to be 0. And then down here, let's actually get the player index. So player index equals get entity property acting entity. And I do not remember what I think it's just player index is one word, but I'm going to cheat just a little bit. I'm going to bring the engine code itself over here. And then player index. Yeah, it is player index. Okay, no worries then. There are advantages to being an engine developer. You can always look up the engine code itself to make sure you're writing the right thing. So once I have the player index, I can then get the key property of player index. So get player property and that's going to be the key hold that I'm after. Key hold. And then we put the player index, and I believe it's just keys. Let's consult the engine code one more time. Keys. Okay, yes. Just want to make sure, because I don't want to have to do error checking over and over and over again on live code. Okay, once I have the key hold, I will say if key hold is OpenBOR constant flag jump. Then we will return. All right, so the reason I'm doing that is the key hold, this is an integer value, but it is a bitwise integer value. And I'm not going to go into a whole lot of details about bitwise here because it would be more than what I can explain in this video. I will do a video that goes into detail about that later on. But basically, we are working with the bits that comprise an integer rather than the integer itself. This is something the engine does a lot internally. I've mentioned it several times, and that's how the keys work. So within this single integer value, each one of these bits represents a key. And so what we're doing here is we are running a logical AND against the flag jump bit. So if the flag jump bit is active, then the player is still holding down the jump key, and we don't want to stop their upward momentum, which means that we just want to exit the function. Okay, so now that we've written that, we can move on to the next piece, which will be, again, I'm going to consult some of the notes I wrote here because I am backporting code and I want to make sure that I do it right. All right, we want to get their velocity. So the velocity, now this one I do remember, velocity y equals get entity property. At least I thought I remembered it. Let's see, xdir. Let's see, was it x? Oh, there goes my phone making noise at me. Let's see. Xdir, zdir. Oh, it is toss v, I think was the legacy way to get velocity. Yep, toss v. I am so used to using the new script commands, and trust me, once I release the new version of the engine and you get a taste of the new script commands, you will never want to go back to these. Acting entity, toss v. That will get our y velocity. And this last part is important because we don't want to change the velocity unless we're already, or excuse me, unless we are moving upward. So if velocity y is greater than 0, then what we will do is take our velocity y, we will multiply it by, and that was something I forgot. I don't like writing static constants into things, so define velocity. I'll just call it a modifier. Modifier is not quite right. Let's call it velocity stop. Multiplier. And just to make sure there's no conflicts with any other functions, we'll put that up on there. I'll copy pasta this down here because I want to undefine it when we're finished. So undef. All right, our velocity multiplier is 0.95. And now we'll take this guy and move it down here. Close it out. All right, so it should be kind of obvious what I'm doing here, but just in case it's not, if the velocity is greater than y, we will take that velocity and multiply it by our constant here, which is 0.95, in other words, 95% of the velocity, and then apply it to that velocity variable. So if we were traveling up at 100 pixels per second, we are now traveling up at 95 pixels per second. Now, this doesn't sound like much of a modification, but you do have to remember that the engine modifies scripts, modifies. The engine will fire this script because this is an upward moving script on every single update, so about 200 times per second. So this is going to very quickly, but very smoothly reduce the velocity y. Now, if I just made the velocity y 0, when we let go of the jump button in game, it would look like they just sort of smacked their head onto an invisible glass ceiling. It wouldn't be very appealing. But in between this reduction of velocity very gradually and the engine's native gravity, it will stop very quickly, which you're going to see when I demo this. Now that we have this variable modified, we need to apply it to the entity. So, and goodness, do I hate the legacy entity velocity modification, but change entity property, let's see, acting entity velocity, and I believe for velocity, let's see, it is null, and then null because I believe it is ordered x, z, y, velocity y. Once again, I'm going to cheat a little bit just to make absolutely sure. So this time I'm going to look for the flag EP velocity. Okay. X, Z, Y. Okay. I was correct about that as well. Except it looks like I mistyped my variable. So, all right, so by passing null into the X and Z properties, the velocity will not change anything at all. Then we will pass it our velocity Y to send it the modified velocity. So in theory, if I've written everything right, let's walk ourselves through this code again. We will execute the code through main, which I need to do here. So let's get our acting variable, acting entity equals get local var, which is self. So that is the entity that is calling the script. Wow, did I misspell that? No problem. And of course, we actually need to declare that variable. Then we will run our function. Now, normally we place this function in another file so that we can reuse it. I'm just keeping it in the same file here as a simple example. So our main, which fires automatically when the script runs, We'll get the acting entity, that is the entity that triggered the script. We'll send it on to our DC Mario height control. In our DC Mario height control, the first thing it's going to do is find out if the entity is currently jumping. Now that's important because if we didn't check if the entity was jumping or not, then this would affect the entity anytime that it was rising up in the air. So in other words, you could use the jump button to modify your height when you were being knocked down. That'd be sort of silly. So if the entity is not jumping, then the script exits immediately and does nothing else. If so, it continues. Then we get the player index. We use the player index to get what the key hold status is. And remember, that is a bitwise integer. So we compare using this mask, the flag jump mask, and we find out if that bit is active. If it is, then that means the player is still holding the jump key, and we want to keep rising up until the entity runs out of its jump height. So yet again, we exit the function and do nothing else. If we make it past that, then we get our current velocity upwards. If we are still rising, then we modify that rising velocity. We make it 95% of its current value, and then we apply it to the entity's upward velocity. And that, of course, happening very quickly, about 200 times per second, combined with the engine's gravity, is going to produce the fall. So let's save this file. And then let's go to Dalsim here and create our onMoveA script. Data cares. Let's see, he is, make sure I get that folder right. One quick trick you can do here is just copy it directly, but I realize that's our file dividers are a little different here, so that's actually all I'm after. Is I want to make sure that I spell a folder right. Scripts and event on move a dot c. And none of these things ever go right the first time. I halfway expect it to crash on me. Well, not really crash, but error out. But that's okay. The engine will tell us what our error is. All right, so let's look up the log and see where I screwed up. Unable to move. Oh, look at that. The log file is your friend, and so are errors. All right, let's see what else I did. Still can't load it. Data cares Dalsim scripts event on move A. Well, let's compare. Rhythm instruction data cares DHL. Goodness gracious, look at that silly typo. Scripts. Event on move. Let's go ahead and make sure that I've got that spelled right too. Event on move A. All right. Close that log file. Which, by the way, a little trick you can do is open up a log file in your browser instead of just opening up in text over and over and over again. But I'm not going to bother with that right now. Let's go back and open up the engine again. Here we go. Load it up. Now that doesn't mean it's going to work like I want it to work, but it is loaded. So if I go back to the Dalsim, let's give it a quick tap. Oh, look at that. If I tap the jump button, you get a small hop. Hold it a little longer, you go a little higher. If I just keep holding it, you'll what I was talking about, how the transition is nice and smooth. It's not like he's smacking his head into the ceiling. And there you have it. Now I will post this code as it is. I'll put some notes to it to make things a little bit easier to read. You're more than welcome to use it. If you do, I only ask that you be credited, or at least don't claim that you wrote it.